Hey everyone, I'm here with Jen and we're gonna talk about the market update for May 2024. I'm gonna give you a little bit of numbers and Jen is gonna give you a few factors as to why the market is behaving the way it is. Now, for the month of May, we had around 1,500 units sold, which was an increase of 9.2% compared to the same time last year. Surprisingly, the early spring market behaved pretty decent, considering we've been dealing with high interest rates and the likelihood of rates coming down. Because the forecast was the Bank of Canada would announce such interest rate cuts, there was this confidence that was built, but a lot of people were still waiting or being on the sidelines. That confidence transferred also into more inventory. We have seen an increase of overall inventory for the year of 2024. Now, what does that mean? On a year-to-date basis, there's been a total of 5,600 units sold for the year of 2024. That's an increase of 5.2% compared to the same time last year. Although May of 2024 was slower than the same time last year, overall our year this year has been busier in terms of amount of transactions and inventory. Now, although the forecast indicated that the Bank of Canada was going to announce such interest rate cuts, when these numbers came out, the announcement hadn't yet arrived. We're talking about May 2024, we're in June of 2024. There was a lack of urgency by some home buyers, although sellers were a little bit more eager to put their houses for sale, which triggered the inventory to pick up. Some buyers are still kind of on the sidelines, and that's mainly due to the lack of affordability and also the forecast of interest rates coming down. There's also a little bit of a misconception that the market will get more affordable just by interest rates coming down, which is not really an indicative of affordability only. Remember that when rates come down, although your purchasing power could increase, is not a significant factor when it comes down to the price you pay for a property. When rates come down, we tend to see the market pick up, and we may see also prices slightly go up. Now, the interesting part about May 2024 that we saw is that we saw an increase of inventory, but an overall decrease of transactions. Now, in terms of average prices, for single-family homes, we're looking at $736,000, which is an increase of 1.1% compared to the same time of May of last year. In comparison to townhomes, the benchmark is around $517,000, which is an increase of 2.1% compared to the same time last year. And for apartments, about $425,000, which is also an increase of 2% from the same time last year. So overall, although there's been a decrease in amount of transactions, so property sold, there's been an increase of inventory, yet an increase of price. This is likely because of an increase of buyer confidence and because we have experienced months of steady interest rates and the unlikelihood of rates going back up. In fact, most people are expecting the rates to come down, and they have started to come down progressively. We don't expect such things to be aggressive, but it's going to be gradual, depending, of course, on other factors like inflation and whatever the Bank of Canada believes is the right track to go into. Now, we all know interest rates is a huge factor when it comes down to affordability, but it's not the only factor. So Jen is going to bring some of those factors, explaining why and what are those factors that impact your affordability for home purchasing.
I wanted to just shed some light on this, as I tend to go to events where this is the topic of conversation, and also because I find that sometimes we get stuck with the numbers, but the numbers are not everything, right? Numbers are really statistics, are things that make us maybe consider making a decision this way or the other way. However, I've had conversations with both professionals. I was last week at an event hosted by ULI. They're an amazing group that puts events and talks about planning in the city, what's happening, the market, and just staying very connected to how our city is growing. Last week, we had a conversation about what are the challenges in Canada, as well as what are the challenges in China. And, even though we're completely different countries, we have a very common denominator, I guess you could say, and it's the aging population. I would say there's 5 factors that really negatively affect our affordability and the supply. And I'll start with interest rates because Shadi just kind of touched a little bit on that. Interest rates for home buyers, if they're up, it doesn't help affordability, but that means they're up for builders as well. So if builders have to pay more interest to build a home, that cost is transferred to the buyer, right? Other factor that I believe is very important is the lack of supply. We're having slow starts. Again, going back to the cost of construction, the fact that things aren't selling. If a builder puts out a few units in the market and they're not moving, they're still carrying that cost, right? And every month that goes by and they haven't sold that unit makes that unit less profitable for them. And let's face it, no one works for free. So you can't blame builders to want to make some profits, but at the same time, we're wanting them to build units for us, right? So, it has to be a good balance, and right now we're not having it.
I think also what the audience has to understand is that although, yes, builders are there for profit, it's a business at the end of the day, and they're bringing more inventory to the public, it's important that also there's some sort of control over how much inventory they can bring up, and perhaps having some sort of balance where our governments can help builders bring up that inventory, because when interest rates, like you mentioned, they go up, it go up for builders. But when interest rates go down, it's not really going to help increase that inventory immediately. It's going to take a long time for us to bridge that gap of inventory that did not happen in the past year, for example, because we did see also a decrease in inventory for new builds. In fact, some builders put a pause to some developments because of the construction cost and because of high interest rates.
Yeah, we've seen condo buildings that were advertised, and it takes a lot of money and time to plan the marketing and the launch of a condo building. And then suddenly they made those rental buildings instead of condo buildings just because the numbers didn't make sense, right?
Which is good to have more rental units, because it's going to help again with also the rental market, which plays a huge factor as well in affordability. People have to live somewhere, and we've also seen that impacted in the rental market. Rent prices have gone up dramatically, and that's also due to really low supply. And the reality is, when we see a decrease in resale, so less transactions, less homes being sold, or a cool down in the market overall, it bridges into the rental market, because all these people that are now buying, they have to go somewhere. And we do see an increase typically in the rental market. So there's really no win. So it's a balance where we need more inventory in both. But like you said, then we have more rentals. And what happens with the resale market? Then the resale market goes up, because all these units that were supposed to be available for the publics are no longer available for resale.
Yes. So another factor is the development fees. Development fees in Ottawa just went up last month, I believe, and they went up, I believe, 11 or 12%, which brings your development charges for one unit in Ottawa from 40-something thousand to 55,000. So that means that if you're tearing down a home with one unit and you're suddenly putting semis, now you are exempt to pay the first unit, but now you have to pay development fees on the other unit, right? In-law suites don't have fees anymore. Before, in the past, people wouldn't do the in-law suites. They would leave them raw, empty, and then when the final permit was presented, then they would go and rough it in and finish it up, right? So development fees are going up. The city has decided to do that. And I understand that we need money for infrastructure. We need money to, stay afloat as a city, but all those fees get transferred to the buyer at the end of the day. And then I think that more importantly than the development fees is the delays and the red tape in the city. We went through the process of, planning, and we're currently building a property here in Ottawa, and we've had delays. There were errors in some of our drawings, and the inspector wouldn't pass it, right? He was like, sorry, I can't stamp it. What you have is good. However, based on the drawings, I'm not able to stamp it until the drawings reflect this.
And how long was that delay approximately?
Like 3 weeks, right?
Yeah.
And he pretty much said, it looks good. It's what we need built. However, you got to go back to the city. And then when you go back to the city, they put you back on the queue. So even though the mistake came from them, you're the one paying for the error. And then all this time and all this money of being, stopped, if you are stopped, it goes back to being back on the builder. So then that gets transferred again to the buyer, right? So there's a lot of just inefficiencies. You'll see projects come up for building towers or whatnot. And, we understand people don't want density. They're scared of what it can happen, how it could impact their way of life. But every time there's a tower or something being proposed and the neighborhood not being
in favor
of that development, thank you. those cause delays, and those delays eventually translate to, again, added costs. Like all these things are added costs, and I always wonder what's a good way of, having such a nice harmony between neighbors and builders, like maybe learning about the project in the early stages and just involving the community to make sure that delays and hard feelings because they are not seeing eye to eye is avoided. But anyway,
I think that's a really good point, that there's that sentiment from the public, the general public, against developers because they're perceived as these big companies are coming to build for profit, not really to look after the harmony of a neighborhood or to, improve the feeling of the neighborhood. They just
and we're not saying that they aren't or they are, right? Like we're just saying.
But it's an issue that is known, right? It's a good point. How do you address it? And like you said, it could be a topic for a different conversation.
Yeah.
Where we can talk about and perhaps break down the reasons why there is negative sentiment towards builders when they're trying to develop. And, there's the project
And
Lansdowne.
we need them to develop.
Exactly. The Lansdowne 2.0. But I think the sentiment of the public is valid, but also the sentiment of wanting to get more units available for the public is also valid. So
we have
exactly,
a crisis,
we have a housing crisis.
Like homelessness has gone up incredibly, right? Like homelessness comes in different ways, like from people that go to shelters to people that perhaps, are on the street to people that are couch surfing. Like, it's grown a lot. I've learned about this in the last few weeks, and we see it in different ways, right? Like things are very expensive for all of us. Some people have credit cards, some don't, right? So it's important to understand that the whole housing crisis trickles down and gets to everyone, really, right? So, aside from delays and red tape that we were talking about, time being money, the high costs of labor and materials. Like lumber went exponentially up during COVID, and then it stabilized a little. However, labor is still really high and construction materials are still really high. So, I'd say those are the 5 factors that really negatively affect affordability and supply, because if it's not affordable to buy, it's probably not affordable to build. So our supply pool is not getting refilled as we need it, right? So I wanted to chat about this a while ago, but I thought I'll jump in today and sabotage Shadi's market update just to, share a little bit about, okay, these are the numbers, but what is it that affects those numbers, right? And I think that, buyers being on the sidelines and, not being ready to buy because the market will crash, or waiting for the rates to go down. When the rates go down, everyone's going to be trying to get in, right? Because there's so many people that have been left on the sidelines or left outside of their affordability, like of being able to afford. And as soon as the rates go down, they will be in there, right? So you'll have more competition. And I just don't think the market is going down. Like the problem we have with housing is huge, and it's not something that can be fixed from the morning to the night.
Yeah, and a fact to wrap this up, a fact to prove your point is months of inventory. So months of inventory, we've spoken about it before, is pretty much the amount of time that would take for the current available inventory to sell if no new homes would come to the market. And currently, for the month of May, we had about 2.3 months worth of inventory compared to 1.3 the same time last year. So although prices went up, we technically have more inventory than the same time last year, but why are prices not lower? And the exact response to that question is all these factors that Jen just mentioned. We may have more inventory, which we do, but it's not necessarily reflecting in the price or affordability.
I think it's important to, adjust expectations. People are like, oh, that house hasn't sold in 2 months. Things are different now, right? Like things aren't selling quick. Not everything, some are. But, there's nothing wrong with a home staying in the market a little longer. Maybe the sellers need to sell at that number. Maybe that's what makes sense for them right now. And, it all comes down to a buyer liking the home enough that they want to pay that price, or the seller may be adjusting with time. It's a hard pill to swallow to think that, a home that you own that could have sold 2 years ago could have profited you an extra $200,000 or $100,000 more than it is now. I always say to clients, if you're a buyer, let's put ourselves in the seller's shoes. I think thinking that way allows us to strategize and position our negotiation better, and same the other way. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us.